Good morning, everyone. Today we're checking out another video from Creature Archives about what if Mega Evolution was real. Well, now you're probably wondering, hey, wait, Mega Evolution? But you never checked out the Pokemon videos. Well, yes, those were recommended for me to skip past. Well, we're here anyway. Let's just go.
Described as evolution that transcends evolution, Mega Evolution is the pinnacle of a Pokemon's potential. By being exposed to powerful mysterious energies, something primal awakens in certain
Infinite
Pokemon,
energy.
causing them to rapidly evolve and pushing their biology to its absolute limits. But this is just fantasy. Real-world
To a dangerous limit in actuality.
biology would never allow such a radical transformation to occur in an individual creature, right? Well, grab your Pokédex and get ready, because today we're going to explore just how close real-world biology could actually get to something like Mega Evolution. And we will go into the specifics of the biology and ecology of Mega Evolutions for the real-world versions of Venusaur, Blastoise, and Charizard that I previously created on the channel in the Evolved Fiction series. So if you have not seen those videos yet and want the full biological breakdown of how they could exist in real life in the first place, be sure to go check those out.
I probably would check them out if they were recommended, but since they were recommended to be skipped, well, here we are.
With the recent release of Pokemon Champions and Mega Evolutions being at the forefront of the game, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to tackle something like this. But before we can begin to figure out how something like Mega Evolution could work in real life, we first need to understand what Mega Evolution actually is in the context of the Pokemon world. First, it's important to understand that evolution in Pokemon is fundamentally different from real-world evolution. In our world, evolution is a slow process that takes place over many generations through natural selection. In Pokemon, evolution is a sudden, energy-driven transformation, where an
more akin to metamorphosis,
individual creature rapidly changes its body, abilities, and even physiology in an instant. Mega Evolution takes this and pushes it even further. Instead of simply progressing to a more complete form, Mega Evolution forces a Pokemon beyond what should be its final stage, essentially pushing it past its natural biological limits.
I just realized you could literally just put a clip of Goku saying, and this is the go even further beyond! And that's exactly how you explain Mega Evolution.
Transformation is powered by a mysterious energy we will refer to as Mega Energy. In the Pokemon world, this energy has two primary origins. The first traces back to ancient meteors with unusual, almost radioactive properties that impacted the planet long ago. The second comes from the firing of a destructive weapon 3,000 years ago, which harnessed immense life energy from the legendaries Xerneas and Yveltal. That event didn't just release energy, it amplified and spread this existing meteor-derived energy across the environment. Over time, some minerals and stones absorbed and stored this energy, forming what we know as Megastones. Each Megastone acts like a specialized reservoir of Mega energy.
Damn, that is a Megastone.
Tuned to resonate with a specific Pokemon species. When paired with a Keystone, the Keystone acts essentially like a switch to make the Megastone release its energy and cause a Pokemon to Mega Evolve. But importantly, the trainer isn't actually the source of this power. They're just the catalyst. The ability to Mega Evolve is something inherent to the Pokemon itself. And this is where things get really interesting. Because while Mega Evolution is usually shown as requiring a trainer and these stones, it's not strictly necessary. There are multiple instances in Pokemon lore where Mega Evolution occurs without human involvement at all. Mega Rayquaza, for example, can Mega Evolve through its own internal biological mechanisms by interacting directly with meteorite energy, bypassing the need for a Megastone entirely. And more recently,
well, it does still have to consume that meteorite, but yes.
In Legend ZA, we've seen rogue Mega Pokemon that transform simply due to environmental exposure to high concentrations of Mega Energy, rather than...
Yes, the in-the-game lore for that is because 5 years ago, literally 5 years ago, is when an X and Y took place.
Any bond with a trainer. This suggests that at its core, Mega Evolution is not a human-dependent phenomena. Under the right conditions, if enough of this energy is present in the environment, a Pokemon can be forced into this state on its own. However, this process is far from stable. Across Pokédex entries, the anime, and games, Mega Evolution is consistently shown to place immense physical and mental strain on the Pokemon. It forces rapid physiological changes that can cause the Pokemon pain, instability, and often very aggressive behavior. And in some cases, the body is pushed so far beyond its limits that it begins to completely break down. So, in simple terms, Mega Evolution is a high-energy transformation caused by an external force acting on a Pokemon, triggering and unlocking a Pokemon's dormant biological potential to push it into an extreme version of itself. Now, obviously nothing exactly like Mega Evolution exists in real life, But the underlying idea that organisms have latent biological pathways that can be triggered by environmental signals absolutely does. At a basic level, an organism's
Go
genome
on.
is not a fixed blueprint where every gene is always active. Most multicellular life relies on regulatory DNA, sections of DNA that control when, where, and how other genes are turned on or off. These systems respond to things like temperature, stress, hormones, nutrition, and even social interactions. This is what biologists call phenotypic plasticity.
Oh, wait, yeah, this is actually an example of that, like with locusts. There's grasshoppers or whatever. Or if they're in a place that's crowded with too many of them and not enough food, they'll undergo a literal biological change and transform into locusts.
Which just means a single organism can develop different forms or behaviors depending on its environment. And we see examples of this all over nature. In African cichlids, subordinate males can rapidly become dominant if the top male disappears. Their coloration brightens, aggression increases, and their reproductive systems activate, all driven by shifts in
Nice.
hormone and brain activity. In spadefoot toads, tadpoles raised in crowded or resource-stressed environments can develop into a completely different carnivorous form, with larger jaw muscles, different mouth parts, and more aggressive behavior.
Well, damn.
In insects,
that's
metamorphosis takes this even further. A caterpillar and a butterfly are radically different forms of the same organism, with tissues being broken down and rebuilt through hormone-driven developmental programs. Even within a single
Quite literally melt its body down to then reconstruct it.
species, environment alone can determine an individual's form. In honeybees, queens and workers are genetically identical, but physiologically quite different. This difference stems from their diet. Larvae fed royal jelly develop into queens, triggering major changes in gene expression, hormone levels, and their anatomy. And one of the closest parallels in real life to a rare hidden form being unlocked comes from the axolotl. Axolotls
Really now?
usually remain in a juvenile, fully aquatic state for life, in a condition called neoteny, but the adult terrestrial form is still encoded in their DNA. When exposed to higher levels of thyroid hormones, that pathway can be activated, triggering a full transformation where they lose
there
their
it
gills, develop lungs, restructure their skeleton, and shift to a land-based lifestyle. So, if we extend that framework,
Yep, this right here is an adult axolotl.
a
I
mega
think.
evolution level transformation would not require new DNA or mutation. It would rely on a large-scale reprogramming of gene expression, meaning which genes are active and which are turned off across the entire body. Hormones would act as the primary control system. These are chemical messengers that travel through the bloodstream and coordinate changes across different organs. In real biology, hormones already control major transformations like metamorphosis, stress responses, and reproductive shifts. In a mega evolution, an external trigger would act like an environmental signal, essentially overriding normal regulation and activating these pathways all at once. That signal
Literally
would then
flicking the
cascade into
switch.
epigenetic changes. Epigenetics refers to chemical modifications that control whether genes can be used or not, acting like switches that can turn entire sections of DNA on or off without changing the code itself. So, instead of adding anything new, the organism is unlocking something that was already there, which is pretty much exactly what happens in actual Pokemon. But
Yeah,
at the same
that's
time,
true.
the body would have to support this physically. Large-scale remodeling requires enormous energy. During amphibian metamorphosis, tissues are broken down and rebuilt in a tightly controlled process. Scaling that up, something like mega evolution would require a massive surge in available energy,
gotta
along
eat.
with increased oxygen use and metabolic output.
And
From an
breathe.
evolutionary perspective, a system like this would not exist as a constant state. It would function as a conditional response, something only activated under very specific circumstances where the short-term benefits outweigh the long-term costs. So, in that sense, something akin to mega evolution is not completely outside the bounds of biology. It's an extreme extension of systems that already exist, where organisms carry hidden developmental programs that can be rapidly activated when environmental or chemical signals cross a critical threshold.
It just needs
Now
that
that we have the
click,
basic
that
framework for how
switch.
mega evolution could work biologically, we can narrow in on how it actually emerges in the real-world versions of Venusaur, Blastoise, and Charizard. Within the Evolved Fiction
Well, who's
universe,
first?
the entire system is driven by a single environmental factor, biologically derived compound known as thermoradion, produced by one of the most extreme organisms on the planet,
The
Thermoradiosaurus
Thermoradiosaurus.
colossus. Thermoradion is a reactive chemical byproduct of Thermoradiosaurus's metabolism,
Whoa.
closely tied to its powerful breath attack. This ability is based on intense oxidative chemistry. In a specialized throat pouch, peroxide-rich compounds are mixed with metal catalyst, rapidly releasing heat and pressure that allow the organism to superheat and expel seawater in a high-energy jet. Similar in
remember.
principle to a bombardier beetle's chemistry, but massively scaled up. Thermoradion itself is not a single stable molecule, but rather a mixture of reactive oxygen species, metal ions, and protein-bound catalytic compounds. Inside
Huh.
Thermoradiosaurus, these are stabilized by binding to metals like iron and manganese, and by protein and pigment structures, allowing them to persist long enough to be expelled. Once released
So how does it become a pearl?
into seawater, thermoradion breaks down quickly into its component parts. However, those components, especially metal ions and oxidized organic residues, do not disappear. Instead, they enter marine biogeochemical cycles, where they bind to sediments, dissolved organic matter, and microbial biofilms. And because Thermoradiosaurus has existed since the Cretaceous and is widespread across the Indo-Pacific,
Oh, there could
this
be
input has been
plenty.
continuous for tens of millions of years, creating a continuous background input of reactive chemistry into the ocean. Under most conditions,
see.
concentrations remain too low to have any biological effect on most organisms. But in specific regions, these compounds can sometimes accumulate to higher levels. For most organisms, extended exposure to these higher concentrations can result in oxidative stress and cellular damage. But in certain lineages that have evolved alongside this chemistry, natural selection has favored redox-sensitive regulatory systems, where these compounds act as signaling inputs rather than purely harmful agents.
Alright, first up, Mega Venusaur.
In Madagascar, Thermoradiosaurus occasionally passes through coastal wetlands and floodplain systems, releasing thermoradion into rivers, mangroves, and stagnant basins. In most environments, this chemistry disperses quickly, but in low-flow wetlands, it can become partially trapped and recycled. Here, reactive components bind to soils, dissolve into shallow water, and are taken up by plant roots. Over time, certain plant communities begin to accumulate elevated levels of these redox-active compounds. Here, the native species Florocrocodilus symbiovita feeds extensively in these same habitats.
The seed bag for
It consumes
or
large amounts of
something.
vegetation and root systems, and because of its unique biology, it maintains a direct vascular connection to the large symbiotic plant growing along its back. This allows absorbed compounds from digestion to be transferred into the plant structure. Under normal conditions, this remains stable. But in rare individuals that remain in highly enriched wetlands for long periods, thermoradion begins to accumulate across both the animal and its plant.
grows.
Once concentrations pass a critical threshold, the plant system responds first. Plants already rely on hormone networks such as auxin and gibberellin to control growth. A
Didn't know
redox-active
that.
chemistry disrupts this regulation. Growth signaling becomes amplified and unstable, effectively overriding normal developmental control. The dorsal plant enters a rapid expansion phase, increasing in size, thickening its tissues, and dramatically boosting photosynthetic output. This also causes the plant to produce even stronger toxins as it shifts into a hyperactive state. Because of the tight vascular and hormonal integration between plant and host, these changes immediately propagate into Florocrocodilus itself. Its muscle fibers begin to rapidly grow, and its bone density rises to support the additional mass. The
I
result is a
see.
large-scale transformation into Mega Florocrocodilus,
Oh,
a heavier,
there it
more
is.
heavily reinforced organism built to carry the expanded plant mass. Movement becomes slower but far more forceful, allowing it to push through dense vegetation and reshape the surrounding environment. Ecologically, the role of the species shifts dramatically. Instead of a generalist browser, it becomes an ecosystem engineer, clearing large sections of wetland and jungle vegetation, redistributing nutrients through feeding and movement. Behaviorally, these individuals become increasingly territorial.
It literally like becomes a natural bulldozer.
And remain tightly bound to resource-rich wetlands that can sustain their high energy requirements. However, these advantages come at a cost. The same oxidative chemistry driving the transformation causes cellular damage. Growth becomes energetically unstable, structural strain increases under the added mass, and long-term metabolic demand begins to exceed environmental supply. Eventually, the organism reaches a biological limit where its size and energy needs restrict further survival flexibility.
Unfortunately leading to its death. Alright,
While
Mega Blastoise.
Thermoradiosaurus primarily inhabits the Indo-Pacific, its chemical byproducts are transported globally through ocean circulation. Over millions of years, thermoradion derivatives have spread through ocean currents around the globe. And when these reach major coastal systems, such as the Amazon outflow, they begin to reconcentrate. Estuaries and floodplains are especially important here. These environments constantly shift between oxygen-rich and low-oxygen conditions, mixing freshwater and saltwater, and accumulating large amounts of organic matter and sediment. This creates ideal conditions for redox cycling, where chemical reactions continuously regenerate reactive compounds from otherwise stable materials.
I see.
As a result, certain slow-moving channels, flooded forest, and sediment-rich zones of the Amazon basin can maintain elevated levels of thermoradion derivatives. The native Testudo hydropharax feeds directly in these environments by
Giant marksman turtle. I like that one.
consuming aquatic vegetation and hunting prey with its twin water cannons on its back. In most individuals, intake of thermoradion through these sources remains too low to matter. But in the oldest
But to him-
hydropharax, those that have spent decades in the same enriched habitats, gradual accumulation eventually becomes significant. What makes
Nice.
hydropharax unique is its specialized water propulsion system. Its paired dorsal cannons are built from internal chambers and glandular tissues originally evolved to compress and expel high-pressure water. Over
Huh.
time, these same
Okay.
structures begin to accumulate thermoradion-derived chemistry. Iron and manganese ions bind to structural proteins, while peroxide-like compounds are stable.
Oh, wait, the manganese and iron would actually strengthen the chambers, allowing the giant marksman turtle to be able to fire at higher pressure.
Stabilized within
And
these
heat.
chambers instead of fully breaking down. This effectively turns the cannons into long-term biological reaction sites. After years of buildup, a threshold is reached where oxidative stress begins triggering signaling responses rather than causing damage. Hormone regulation shifts, gene expression changes, and dormant growth pathways activate system-wide. The body responds first by reinforcing key load-bearing structures. The
Like
spine,
limbs.
shoulders, and cannon base undergo bone thickening and connective tissue strengthening. At the same time, the twin cannons begin structural remodeling. Through bone growth and keratin reinforcement, they gradually fuse into a single reinforced barrel,
Oh,
with thicker
okay.
walls and expanded internal chambers designed for higher pressure output. This is where the transformation becomes more
I actually like this form a lot.
extreme. Instead of simple mechanical water compression, Mega Hydroferrox uses controlled internal chemistry. Peroxide compounds break down in the presence of metal catalyst, releasing oxygen and heat. This sharply increases internal pressure when expelling water. These rapid pressure changes also generate cavitation, which is the formation and collapse of vapor bubbles, producing powerful shockwaves within the water stream. Combined, this results in a high-velocity hydraulic blast capable of fracturing bone. Ecologically, this shifts Hydroferrox from a relatively passive aquatic
Damn.
omnivore into a dominant apex force within the Amazon. Mega
An
individuals
apex turtle. Now that is just plain impressive.
tend to occupy mineral-rich channels where thermoradion concentrations are highest, and they become highly territorial. However, the costs are severe. The same internal chemistry that enhances its weapon system continuously stresses tissues, increasing the risk of structural failure in the cannons. Oxidative damage accumulates over time, and the energy demands of maintaining the system is extremely high. Because this transformation requires decades of buildup, it typically occurs in late life stages. Once triggered, it accelerates physiological decline, pushing the organism into a final peak state before finally breaking down.
So the way it passes on is that eventually the cannon would just have to crumble or implode. Mega
Along
Charizard
the
X.
eastern coast of Africa, particularly in regions shaped by seasonal upswelling and mineral-rich runoff, thermoradion accumulates into unusually metal-rich concentrations. Iron, manganese,
Oh, let's see. If we're doing Mega Charizard X first, that means we're doing the Fire Dragon type. So I'm gonna guess he's gonna somehow have an increase of sulfur in his
and other transition
system.
metals bind to organic matter, sediments, and decaying biomass, creating localized hotspots where reactive chemistry is far more concentrated than in open ocean conditions. For most of the year, these areas remain biologically unremarkable, but between May and July, conditions change dramatically. This is when the sardine run occurs, driving massive schools of fish into shallow coastal water where many become trapped in tidal pools or stranded along the shoreline. Igniferous
Aha.
Draconiformes populations converge on these feeding grounds,
Ooh, the African Fire Dragon. I
using
like
their
that.
fire breath to superheat shallow pools and rapidly immobilize prey. The result is an intense period of competition, with individuals densely packed along the coastline competing for access to the
Wait a minute. Technically, this is not a dragon. This would be a wyvern. Reason why is because as the wings are connected to the forearms. You see, for it to have to be a dragon, it has to have 4 limbs and 2 wings. This has 2 limbs and 2 wings. It's a wyvern.
richest feeding zones. During this window, dominant individuals consume extremely large quantities of fish, and with them, increasing amounts of thermoradion-enriched material. In most individuals, this exposure remains below any meaningful threshold, but in the most dominant, high-intake individuals, accumulation can gradually reach a tipping point. At that point, thermoradion's reactive oxygen chemistry and metal ion load begin to overwhelm normal cellular regulation.
Oh, damn.
Hormonal signaling shifts, gene expression changes across multiple tissues, and growth pathways that are normally suppressed become active. The transformation unfolds over a relatively short amount of time, pushing the organism into a distinct Mega X state. The first visible
there it
change is
is.
structural. The body becomes significantly more massive and muscular, especially across the forelimb, shoulders, and neck. Muscle fibers thicken and become more densely packed, increasing raw power output while reducing agility and sustained endurance. At the same time, metal ions from thermoradion begin integrating into load-bearing tissues. Claws and teeth, already partially mineralized, become further reinforced with iron and manganese binding to keratin and bone
Metal
matrices.
claws.
Externally, the scales darken from orange into deep black and blue tones. This shift is linked to increased melanin production, which acts as a protective buffer against rising oxidative stress generated by the transformation chemistry itself. However, the most deadly change occurs in the fire system. Under normal conditions, the Ignitorous produces flames through a controlled biochemical reaction in specialized glands. Lipid-derived fuels such as ethanol-like compounds, methane, and sulfur-containing organics are stored alongside hydrogen peroxide and enzyme systems similar to those used by bombardier beetles. Just before expulsion, these components mix and are ignited through a jaw-based spark mechanism, producing a pressurized jet of flame. In the Mega X state, the system remains structurally the same, but thermoradion alters its chemistry. Iron and copper ions accumulate within the glandular tissues and reaction
Oh, that's how you explain it being blue, the copper.
chambers, acting as catalytic agents. These metals do not burn themselves, but they accelerate and stabilize key reaction steps, particularly the breakdown of hydrogen peroxide and the release of oxygen, which is normally a limiting factor in biological combustion. At the same time, they stabilize intermediate reaction states, allowing more complete energy release instead of partial breakdown. In effect, the system becomes both faster and more efficient at converting fuel into heat. The result is a dramatic increase in combustion temperature and energy output. The flame shifts from an orange to an intense blue, and the discharge becomes more forceful and focused due to improved reaction efficiency within the pressurized system. Ecologically, Mega X individuals effectively monopolize sections of coastline during the peak of the sardine run. Their increased power allows them to dominate feeding zones and displace rivals, concentrating
I mean, you're only going to be a Mega for so long before you just croak, dude.
predation pressure into highly controlled territories.
That's a beast.
However, the state is not stable long-term. Continued exposure to cumulative metal loading and oxidative stress gradually impair cellular function. Energy demands remain extremely high, and internal regulation becomes increasingly strained over time. What results is a powerful ecological peak state, perfectly suited to exploiting a brief seasonal abundance, but one that cannot be sustained beyond that environmental window.
Before croaking. Alright, now, why?
Ignitorous draconiformes typically live in stable colonies along mountainous regions like the Drakensberg, where consistent updrafts and reliable prey support a relatively steady lifestyle. But sometimes during long droughts when prey availability collapses, some individuals leave their colonies entirely. They adopt a nomadic strategy, traveling extraordinary distances in search of food. There are documented cases of individuals moving up to 2,000 miles beyond their normal range, following coastal corridors along East Africa and crossing island chains in the Indian Ocean. During these long-range flights, they encounter a very different form of thermoradion exposure. Along certain coastal and open ocean regions, where strong wave action, upswelling, and sharp thermal gradients interact, trace thermoradion derivatives become aerosolized. As Ignitorous passes
and this is how you're explaining how it stays as a fire-flying type.
repeatedly through these areas during flight, these compounds accumulate across the respiratory system, particularly within the air sac network and lung tissues that already support its highly efficient oxygen exchange. Normally, this level of exposure would be damaging due to oxidative stress at the cellular level, but in rare individuals, the body begins interpreting this stress as a regulatory signal. This activates a system-wide endocrine response. Metabolic rate rises sharply, mitochondrial density increases, and cellular energy production is pushed towards maximum sustained output. The organism shifts into a high-performance energetic mode focused on continued flight efficiency. At the same time, large-scale musculoskeletal remodeling begins. Flight muscles attached to the sternum and shoulder girdle increase in density and efficiency. Connective tissues reorganize to better withstand sustained wing loading cycles, and the wings expand in surface area and structural reinforcement, improving lift and reducing energetic cost per wing beat. The result is a transformation into a form specialized almost entirely for quick long-distance flight. Mega Ignitorous Y becomes lighter relative to its wing capacity, more aerodynamically efficient, and capable of maintaining extremely long durations of flight.
It becomes a true king of the sky under King Ghidorah.
In peak conditions, individuals can sustain speeds approaching 100 miles per hour. This fundamentally alters its ecological role. Rather than remaining tied to a territorial range, it becomes a wide-roaming aerial predator and scavenger, capable of tracking migratory prey and accessing distant coastal ecosystems that would normally be inaccessible. However, like the other Mega Evolutions, this adaptation comes at a cost. The same oxidative chemistry that enables the transformation continuously damages tissues at the cellular level. Energy demands remain extremely high, requiring constant feeding to maintain function, and any prolonged shortage of food leads to rapid decline. In contrast to the X form, which is driven by physical dominance, the Y form represents an endurance-driven response to the same underlying environmental chemistry. Thank you everyone for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss any
Alright, I think that's going to be the end of today's video, and I hope you all enjoyed this. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more. Link to the original will be in the description below, and I'll see all of you next time when we flick back on. Till then, this is Fox, signing out. Peace.